we have updates from our 11/17 meeting. So the first one is the RFP for the DEI community assessment. We have two sub-items under this, the reference checks and also the questions for vendors. I know Denise, who isn't here, was able to contact some of the references. She didn't hear back from all of them. But I think when she does, she'll update the documents that were shared with everyone. Did everyone get a chance to look at those earlier?
Anybody have any comments or questions on what they saw from that?
Seems like good feedback.
What's that, Jay?
Seems like good feedback.
Yeah, especially for the one vendor seemed like very effusive almost, and the other was just very like, yep, we worked with them, and yep, they, you know.
Kind of a checklist.
Yeah, yeah. The one question I had, and I think we had talked about that, was, do we want to do any checking on references that they didn't list, but that they had listed as districts that they had worked with? I think we had talked about that at some point when we were discussing it, or did we just want to stick with the references that they had provided?
In my opinion, it would be good to do our due diligence and maybe choose one or, I'm sorry.
No, I think it's the, something's running back there,
I
yeah.
think it would be good if we did our due diligence to really check everything. Maybe not check if they listed 100 references, but certainly take a sampling of maybe a random 3 or 2 or 3 or something like that to see.
Of like places where they list as work, but they didn't provide as references.
Yes.
Okay. I think so too, just doesn't hurt. Since we only have 2 companies to work with, I think, like you said, do the best that we can in terms of doing what we, okay. And then Brian's been in touch with the vendors, to get some potential dates for them to zoom in, for us to schedule a meeting with them to go over the list of questions that people had put together for us to ask them. And I think, Brian, you're waiting for a couple people to get back to you, or you're waiting?
So I did hear, because Insight got back to me right away, and they had some dates. Let's see, they said this Thursday the 16th, next Monday or Tuesday, the 20th or 21st. I kind of just asked, in the next few weeks.
Yep.
But I guess one thing we could think about too is, we could find a time that works for most people or everyone and go with that, but the other option too, looking at the calendar, I think our next meeting would be January 19th. There's also an option if we just try to book one of them, 6 o'clock on the 19th, the other one at 6:30, and then, we could sort of use the bulk of our time for our next meeting to have them zoom in, ask questions. And then I know a later agenda item tonight is kind of talking about the length of our meetings. If we did want to extend them, we could potentially, stay a little bit later that night, get all of our answers, and then, potentially come to a vote to see if, we want to move one of them forward to the school committee. Because I think the school committee meets January 11th and then January 25th.
Yes, that's
So,
correct.
in looking at sort of our timeline, even if we were able to meet with them sort of in the next week or two before the upcoming winter break, we'd have to wait till our January meeting anyway to kind of discuss it. So, I don't know, I kind of wanted to throw that out there. These people seemed, very responsive and very willing to meet with us to, see what questions we had. So I'm thinking if we gave them enough notice that they would have no problem being able to make it for the 19th. So that's an option. Or like I said, we could look at some of the dates for, I don't know, this Thursday would be too quick of a turnaround. Both of them said next Monday and Tuesday they're available, the 20th and 21st.
I think trying to get anything done in December is very crazy.
Yeah.
Because December is just,
I agree.
I don't know what everybody else's December looks like, but that's just a bad month.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great month, but it's a bad month.
It's busy.
Yeah.
And I figured just, we wouldn't have to come up with another night where everyone would sort of have to figure out their plans and stuff. If it's already on a scheduled meeting, we can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone that way,
Yeah,
so.
I think that's good.
Okay, so I guess I'll make a motion to, I'll propose that we have our questions taking place at our next DEI meeting, which is gonna take place in the 19th of January?
Yep. And did PCG not get back to you at all, or?
They did, they got back to me, They actually sent me an email on Sunday and they said the 20th or the 21st
Okay.
they were available. Actually, or the 22nd. They basically gave me 3 days for next
Okay,
week.
so, I mean, presumably with 3-4 weeks.
I don't think
should
it'll be a
no
problem, yeah. And what I'll do is I'll email both, companies tomorrow, first thing when I get in, and just say, you know, we're looking for the 19th, that's our next meeting. And I figure it's 6 o'clock, 6:30, I think that should be plenty of time.
Yeah,
We give
yeah.
half-hour time slots for
Yeah.
them. Okay.
And then do we have the ability to set up in the auditorium?
We'll have to think logistics for that, just with, we might be able to. We probably could,
Or the
because
media center, maybe?
I'm thinking we probably should just have one person sort of asking the questions,
Yeah.
and that person kind of be on their computer.
Yeah,
But then we could potentially just, you know, project the
Put it up,
people
yeah.
on, whether it's in the auditorium or wherever we can fit. I think the auditorium would be fine, one person on their computer sort of communicating with them, and then
and
we
then
can have the
stream it up
Zoom.
on the big
Yep,
screen, okay.
yep.
And sound won't be a problem?
I think so. I'll look into that. I'll talk to, somebody at the high school or IT, just to
Okay.
sort of like let them know what we want to do with it. And I guess I'll get their input if they think the auditorium or, yeah, maybe even the media center.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I'm sure the media center would be set up for that too.
Okay, all right, awesome.
So yeah, I mean, we'll plan on having it here at the high school again. I guess we'll just figure out what room makes most sense.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, great.
So I'll make that motion that we're gonna move forward with the questions. We're gonna do it on the 19th. Do I have a second?
Okay.
I'll second.
Thank you, Angela. All in favor?
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously, so we'll plan on having that on the 19th. And I'll just confirm once I hear back from both companies, presumably by the end of this week. And I guess the only other question that I had on that agenda item, I know we had those 2 documents for questions, and, you know, there were probably a handful of questions put on there. Did anyone want to add to it, or have any, I don't know, anything to say about the questions? I think it's a good set of questions for each of them, sort of asking, you know, in terms of availability, whether it's virtual, in person, you know, pricing, if there's any, you know, additional costs or anything like that. You know, asking some questions about, I think, their timeline, whether they were able to sort of hit all of their, you know, marks with previous companies that they worked with. So I think we're good on that, as long as there's no other questions. Okay, cool.
I can I say, it was a little bit concerning to me that only a couple of us commented on that document. I hope everybody opened it and looked at it and did due diligence, but given the number of people on this committee, it was a little bit scary how few questions were on there,
Talking about the question document, right?
on the
Yeah,
questions.
I did that. Yeah.
Okay. So the next one, I think, this next agenda item got pushed back from a couple meetings just for time purposes, but the next up is the socioeconomic subgroup data. I don't know if someone's presenting that, or,
Yeah, so the next 2, 1 and 2 really kind of go hand in hand. The first one, like you said, this is the subgroup data that we had asked David Marissa to put together. I think probably you guys have already reviewed it. It was a breakout of free and reduced lunch status by category, and it had a breakdown. Dave, do you want to talk to the chart? Do you remember? It was like,
I have it up. And along with the letter that was sent in, I think someone referenced it, we're not data people. Like, I'm not a fact, like, data digger. So, I think we did the best we could, but I think, once, and if we do decide to hire one of these companies to come in, I think that they would do a much better job than this Spanish and French teacher could do. But we did kind of break it down into the different schools, and the number of students receiving free and reduced lunch is not necessarily accurate on these because of, I guess, grants and things that the cafeteria and the food services have received. The students didn't really have to sign up, and families didn't have to submit paperwork to receive free lunch or reduced lunch, so the numbers are not necessarily accurate.
and that's this year and last year, correct?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And that's, you touched on the other part, it was one of the comments that we received from the last meeting, and I circulated it to everybody, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, from Bob Jones, he's a former school committee, and he is a data guy, and he's really good at data. And he highlighted a lot of areas of inequity and discrepancies in scores, and I cannot argue with anything that he says, because he is spot on. But I wanted to speak to that tonight because, you know, he brings up a lot of valid points in his emails, and there are many equity gaps within our district that need to be addressed, and they are far too many for this committee to tackle in 1 hour per month. And, you know, many of the issues that we've identified and that he has identified have been brought up through various other channels with no movement, which is kind of why this subcommittee was created in the first place. And I think, Dave, you spoke to it, and I would agree that this is why a district-wide equity assessment is so important. So that the necessary resources by an outside independent firm can review our strengths and our weaknesses and advise on a path forward. And then in the meantime, while that progresses, you know, this committee can look for smaller, low-hanging fruit, so to speak, which is what, you know, the student survey that we've talked about was originally intended for. You know, not to mine hard data and get to like facts and figures, but kind of get a feel for where hearts are at and minds are at and things like that. And I just think it's important to keep that in mind. Those data diving things, we just can't do. Like, it's not possible for an hour a week. There are just too many things to talk about. But I really appreciate him highlighting those things. I think the more people who point those out, the better. And, you know, I think that's good, but I think it just points to the need for the bigger community assessment. And I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts and feelings on that. Anybody?
I agree. I mean, you know, I have pointed out some things, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, the kind of obvious things that are areas of need and inequities, and specifically, you know, what I see here at the high school, and I'm sure that people in other buildings can come forth with other obvious things that could be looked at and, you know, remedied. So, I mean, for example, I've been asking for late buses for the high school students. We don't have late buses here. However, we do have a lot of after-school programs, one being the Academic Resource Center, which is for academic support, and those students that may need that support don't have access to it because there's no transportation for them. So, you know, that's one of those things that became glaringly obvious to me when, you know, I look at kids and say, you know, you really should go to ARC, get some extra help, or stay after school to make up the test that you missed last week. I can't. I don't have a ride home. And so, you know, the middle school has a late bus, and we don't have a late bus. So there's, you know, things like that that are pretty clear in my mind. That's just one example. So, but I absolutely agree about the actual, looking at all that data. It's a lot to digest, and there's so many different, I don't know, aspects, categories, the demographics, the everything that it would take us as a committee, I think, years to go through it all. So.
So on the subject of late buses, that was one area where I feel like maybe we can have an impact. Angela spoke to, you know, late buses impacts. There is a late bus at Wickford Middle School currently, no, Davisville currently only, right? Wickford does not have one, only Davisville has one. There is not one at the high school. And at the high school, and probably at the middle school, but I'm not so sure, it impacts the accessibility to the after-school support. It impacts, for some students, the ability to participate in athletics, after-school clubs, things like that, and also detention. It says in the detention policy that transportation is not a valid reason to miss a detention. So that continues to pile up for students if they do not have a ride home from detention. So I know busing is an issue within the district, you know, there's a bus shortage and things like that, but I really feel that not providing, historically there have been late buses at the high school, and I really feel that not providing a late bus to the students here is a disadvantage to those students who do not have access to a vehicle or parents who are able to come and pick them up. And it really does, especially with the access to the after-school support and with the detention where they're being penalized for not being able to stay after for the detention. It really is an area of equity that I think needs to be addressed. It's my understanding that at Wickford, they provided a late bus, but there wasn't a need for it, so they stopped it. Is that correct?
That's what I was told.
Brian, do you remember, was there one when you were there?
Yeah, when I was there, we always had one.
Right.
We didn't last year just because we weren't running after school
Right.
clubs and activities, but prior to that we did. The way the late buses would work, previously they would come to the high school when they had them, they pick up whatever students they had, then they'd go to Wickford, pick up our students, and then they would drive the students home. I think there were always two because it was split either north, south, or east, west.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, we had students that used it, but I mean, it wasn't, you know, I would say the majority of our students probably either got picked up or lived close by so they could walk home or something
Right.
like that. So it wasn't a huge number of students that used it, and we only had it on Tuesdays and Thursdays when we ran our after-school clubs. But we did have it there, so.
Right,
yeah.
I remember it was there when my kids were at Wickford too.
Yep,
And
yeah,
yeah, like,
it was
the
an
bus
option.
was not full by any stretch of the imagination, but there were always kids who were on it. And I think, even if we were able to, see if we could arrange it on a trial basis and see how many kids were actually using it and things like that, I think that's something that, you know, I think that there are kids who would use it if it was available. And historically, there's been one here as well. I think it's been, what, the past 2 years that we haven't had one?
Right, well, because of COVID last year, there were none
Right.
anywhere because there were no after-school anything at any
Right.
of the buildings. So, but this year, now that things have resumed, you know, relatively normally, you know, wearing masks, but otherwise relatively
Right.
normally. But we have not been, late buses have not been like reinstated at the high school.
I think beyond even the detention and the after-school help, not having a late bus is just one more impediment, or one more stepping stone to disengaging students. If they have access to a late bus, they can stay for art, they can stay for music, they can stay for theater, sports,
Yep.
all of those things. And not having it is just one more obstacle for the kids to have to overcome to be able to participate.
Yeah.
And if the kids are participating and engaged, I don't think anyone would argue that they would certainly do better
Right.
in school and feel more connected.
Yeah, that's a great.
And just one more thing I'd like to throw out to consider, in terms of the detention. If students, it's in the discipline policy, if they skip, right, or do not show up to their assigned detentions after so many that they skip, they're given either in-school or out-of-school suspension. So now they're taken out of class. They miss instructional time. And maybe 8 times out of 10, the reason for the detention in the first place is that they were late to school or late to class. So it's this just perpetuation of loss of instructional time for these kids, and we're just kind of disengaging them further and further. They're getting farther away.
Would we make a recommendation to recommend that Dr. Roger ask the school committee for access to late buses? Is that the next step? How does that work?
Yeah, I think, I mean, do we all agree that, like, late bus is something that we'd like to see them look into? Is that,
Do we know, 'cause my understanding when they got rid of them, because I don't know what year it was at the high school that they stopped doing it, but what they did instead, so from what I can gather, they stopped running late bus at the high school because there was such low usage of it that it didn't make any sense. And they were also having some trouble with supervision. I mean, like, school would end and typically the students that would stay for after-school clubs or activities are the ones that would use the late bus. But I guess what was happening was kids might be leaving and then coming back and hopping on the late bus, and it was just sort of a supervision kind of nightmare. And on top of the fact that there just weren't a lot of students using it, so then what they did was they, students that needed a ride after school, they ended up buying RIPTA passes for them, so they could get on the RIPTA bus that runs out here, and then that was able to take them home. Do we know if that's been offered this year, or if that's been brought up at all?
The RIPTA bus goes where though? I mean, like, North Kingstown is not exactly a public transportation friendly town.
The kids that would need it most would have to walk either from Post Road all the way down School Street, and cross over Davisville Road, to their complex, or they would get dropped off at the other end of Davisville Road, like at the intersection behind the old tar box.
And like, anybody who lives over, like in the area of town where I live, the bus doesn't go there, so
Okay.
that's not really if we lived in the city, that would be a great option, but
Okay.
here in North Kingstown, I don't think that is a viable alternative.
Okay.
What's the number, like, if we're saying low usage, what's low?
That
What's the cutoff?
I don't know.
I remember under Marissa Eisner, I run the detention program over at Davisville for the past, I don't know how many years. And we would consistently have, the buses would come from the high school to Davisville, the kids would switch and hop on a different bus that was going in the opposite direction. We would consistently have, I would say 15 to 20 high school students on the bus making that switch. And then those buses would then pick up the middle school students as well.
I mean, at Wickford, there was less than that coming from the high school, maybe like 3 to 4 every time. So, I mean, and looking at that, it seems like probably 20 to 25 maybe, using it, I guess, so.
To me, that's not low, but.
That's just as many kids that are on my son and daughter's
Yeah.
school bus in the morning.
Right.
So, I mean, is there a way that we can, maybe is the first step to request information on late bus usage and, you know, why it was discontinued, or,
And also, did they used to use the big buses that were contracted out, or the small buses that we own?
They would use the one.
Those big buses,
Big buses,
yeah.
yeah. Because we do own the short buses, and if I don't know what's involved in that,
right,
but if usage is low enough to not justify having a big bus, that could potentially save significantly.
right.
It just, so is one bus does both the middle schools and the, like,
I'm not sure how it worked at Wickford. I think that Wickford had their own separate bus, and then I believe that Davisville's bus came from the high school because they would finish their after-school activities earlier, because they got out earlier, and then they would swing by Davisville at about 4:30. Kids would be picked up there, and there were 2 that always come. We had an east bus and a west bus.
And just the other thing I wanna point out about buses is there is always a bus available to take a sports team somewhere. So that's something to keep in mind, you know, when we talk about whether there are buses available and things like that. So it's a question of priorities.
it's been hard this year though, yes, it's like in some of the sports, it was hard. And there were a lot of bus issues, even with the sports this year, I know.
Right. But this year, I mean, if a team needs to go to a game, there is a bus. So,
You mean just making the effort to get the bus?
correct, yeah. So it's not that they don't exist, it's prioritization of resources. And I understand athletics are important, we are an athletic family, you know, state champion jacket, you know, but, the kids are important after school also, so.
So who makes those priority decisions?
What's that?
Who makes those priority decisions?
I do not know the answer to that question. I don't know enough about how transportation works. Brian, do you?
My guess is probably the building administrators talking with, you know, whether it be Mary King or the director of transportation, just about, you know, usage and things like that. I don't know what the conversation, how it went here at the high school, when they ended it. So yeah, I mean, I think we probably, yeah, I mean, we might have to get some more information, because I don't know, the other thing is, you know, the availability in terms of which buses are able to go, because I know that one thing that they have to do is they have to wait until they're done with their elementary runs in order to pick them up. So trying to figure out, you know, which buses are able to come to each school. But Davisville has them this year, is that what you said before? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would guess between, you know, administration and transportation, they probably made those decisions previously.
So, do we wanna ask for information, like what it would look like to put a late bus in place? You know, what, maybe why it was stopped, or like the first ask maybe for some information? What do you guys think?
I guess so. I don't know what the process is. So.
I don't either,
Yeah.
we're making this up as I go along, so.
Oh, Jen must know, right? It's like you must have some conversation with like a good starting point.
Yeah.
Right,
Mhm.
figure out,
Yeah, like, you know, what would it look like to put a late bus program, you know, what would it entail, you know?
and it's hard to think we have only one middle school and then the other two, that's glaring.
Yeah, 'cause I think we can request information, you know,
Maybe it just starts as an email to Dr. Auger and Mary and the
Right.
transportation director and
right.
see
Yeah.
where it goes.
Some background on the late bus program, why it was discontinued, you know, what it would look like to start it back up again, and kind of go from there. And then review what they say, and then review that, and then decide on next steps. Does that sound? Alexis, do you have any input on, any comments on the bus?
I think late buses would be really beneficial to a lot of
I
kids.
can't hear, I'm sorry.
Late buses would be really beneficial to a lot of kids at the school. Like,
Yeah.
even if some kids have rides, I know that like with bigger families, if you have multiple kids, sometimes you've got a bunch of different activities going on.
Yeah.
So like even then it would be really helpful.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I'm not sure if it's like you said, part of it may have been kids leaving campus for a couple of hours and then coming back. I'm not sure that's a bad thing either. Like, I don't know. I mean, obviously the late bus is, you know, priority would be, you know, after school activities at the school, but if somebody wanted to go to the library for a couple of hours or wanted to, again, it's just playing devil's advocate a little bit. It's obviously not.
Well, so I mean, speaking for the middle school, we never allowed that just for like liability issues, you know? I mean, because if the students at school leaving and then coming back and then taking the late bus, they're our responsibility that entire time. So
Okay.
that's why we said you have to stay at
Forget
school.
Everything I just said then.
So I would assume it's probably a similar case for high school.
I'm sure it is.
You know,
That's my naive.
But there seems to be like you could do a workaround, like you could get a pass if you go to
We've
a
done that.
homework club, you get a pass and that's what enters you versus the
Yeah.
kids that are.
I think, do they still give passes for late buses at Davisville?
Not anymore, it may just because of COVID that we just stopped handing out the papers, so we're not.
Because I know that every student that would stay after, regardless of whatever activity the advisor or teacher that they were with would write them a pass. They would have a little blue pass to get on the late bus, that was their ticket on the bus. So I don't see a problem with that, you know, protocol being put back into place.
Yeah, even if it's electronic or something, right? I mean. Okay, so what's the motion to request info on history of late bus program and what it would look like to re-implement at high school and Woodford Middle, or just the high school, or?
Well, I think to be equitable,
Yeah, it should
both.
be everything, yeah,
Equitably across the district.
yeah.
What about elementary schools? I know they run a lot of after-school programs as well. I don't know how that, like,
My son,
If-
it
if
was in
there's-
the, like, after-school sciencey something, yeah, just today, but I remember the form had a, will you need a late bus? I didn't choose that because we were able to do pickup, but it looked like it did cover, like, I live right off Newcomb, so and my kid's at Quintessence, so it kind of seemed like it just went down Newcomb across Post Road and other street and did that line where I would assume the most need is from the school, so I thought that was awesome.
Yeah,
I did not realize it was not a thing everywhere.
I think Quid is covered by a grant, that late bus for the after-school program. I think that's different, like, I think that's
I don't
specific.
remember that from my kids from our school.
Yeah, I think that's specific to Quid. I'm not 100%, but I know that they have grant money that they use to try and get the kids to stay after school, and that they provide transportation because it is such a barrier to access there, which is amazing,
Yeah.
like, but I don't think they have that at Hamilton. They never did when my kids were there, or at any of the other elementary schools. I don't-
Davisville may have received money in the past as well, then through a grant,
Yeah,
when Mrs. Bowe was there.
yeah. Yeah, so we'll just say district-wide, and then we'll get a breakdown by school. Because I don't know how often they run after-school stuff at the elementary schools that require after-school staying.
It's usually for like a 4 or 6 week period, you know. It's not consistent, but I'm not sure if after-school busing needs to be consistent, or it can have that, 4-week contract or 6-week contract.
Okay.
And it really, a lot of that depends on what programs are being run, and most of those programs are run by the PTOs.
Right.
So it's what they feel like running, or what they
yeah.
can afford to pay for.
Okay. Okay. So, does somebody want to make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Second?
Sherry? All in favor?
Did you want, do we have the motion, is it written down?
I wrote
She wrote it down.
information on the history of the late bus program and what it would look like to re-implement district-wide, broken down by, like, high school, middle school, elementary school level.
Any opposed? No? Okay.
Okay.
That passes unanimously.
And then the last thing, which we really didn't run into tonight, but it seems like every other meeting we've been like cutting things short because we've had like too full of an agenda item. So I wanted to get a feel for how people felt about extending the meeting time to an hour and a half instead of an hour. And if we were in agreement, did we want to start earlier or go later? So I guess first off, informally, who would want to extend to an hour and a half? Just raise your hand informally. Okay, so we'll take a motion on that. Somebody want to I'll make the motion to move the meeting to an hour and a half. Can I get a second? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Okay. And then, how about before, do we want to go, what time do we start now, 6? So do we want to go 5:30 to 7, or do we want to go 6 to 7:30?
Personally, I would rather do 6 to 7:30, but that's just,
Same.
Me too, yeah. Is everybody,
I guess I'm the only one that would go 5.
I would go 5:30 too.
I put 5:30, but.
that's because you guys are already here.
Yeah, since 6:30 this morning, so yeah.
So let's, everybody raise their hand who would go 6 to 7:30. I just want to see.
I can make 5:30
I can do
work
either,
too,
so.
it's not a big deal.
Okay, so, sorry, you NKSD people are looking at us. Should we wait, and why don't we pull the whole group, because there's some people not
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
so we'll hold on that and pull the whole group. Okay. Okay. And then, so Brian, our start time will be TBD for that meeting.
Yep.
But we'll get that nailed down. I don't think we have to nail down the time today, we just have to have the time before, 48 hours before
Yeah.
so we're okay on that.
We can probably just send out,
Yeah.
a poll to everybody electronically.
Yeah, could we poll or do one of those surveys, or do we have to do it in the confines of?
I think we can, I'm pretty sure that we can just send it out electronically. We can include those in the minutes,
Yeah.
for our next
Yeah.
meeting, and I think that should be fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thanks you guys. Can I get a motion to, did you have a question?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, when we do it, like, instead of like yes or no, like, if you could, cause I could probably be flexible to just like, for the people, I wanna be thinking about the people that are here, so even though it's my preference would be the sixth, I could do this, so if there's a way to say first choice, second, and then.
Okay,
Something
yep.
like that, instead of a just yes, no, because I could probably, that's
Okay.
a long day, and I can probably.
So like I can't do it, or.
Yeah, it's not a
Yeah.
can't,
Yeah.
it's my preference,
Yeah.
but like I definitely
I could
make
do
it
it too,
happen.
Angela, if I had.
Yeah. She's very selfish now.
Okay, anybody have anything else?
Question semi-related, but there was I wasn't at November's meeting, but there was an agenda item, I think for October. I wanna say it was like the, statement for Asian Pacific Islander students.
Yes.
And then I didn't know whatever happened to that. 'cause
It's
we
gonna
ran
come
out of
back on
time.
the agenda, it's a pending agenda item, so
Got it.
you should see that, well, maybe not January because of the questions, but it was on the agenda for this one, and I had to take it off because of time, so I have a running list of agenda items, and it's right at the top, so, yeah,
Cool.
that has not gone away.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking about that. Anybody have anything else? And that's another reason why I wanna extend the meeting to an hour and a half, because it'll give us more time to go through some more things. Cause I hate bumping stuff off to the next meeting, cause we don't have time, so, okay. And I hate being confined to an agenda, cause we could talk about that now, but it wasn't on the agenda, so we can't. Awesome, so can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor? Okay, awesome, thanks you guys.
This is a first.
I know.